This is a story about how when you meet someone, you never know what would come of it. In this story, you'll hear about Mandy and her husband, Brian, who started Third Wave Psychotherapy, and the relationship and understanding of chronic disease and what that means for a family going through it. So when I needed a therapy practice to assume support for patients that are going through mental health issues, she was there, ready, willing, and able, has been an incredible partner of ours, and this is her story. This is why she's such an incredible partner. Watch now.
One of our unofficial mottos is the concept of ride the wave. So ride the wave means that, like, you know, in life you are going to have waves. It's kind of two-part. So one part is the waves are going to come, and so you can't control the waves, but you can learn to surf, is the metaphor of you don't get to choose what life throws at you. You know, you only get to choose how you get through it. And so that's, yes, definitely a unofficial motto of ours. And I think the other part of it is being able to, you know, surfers know that the wave is going to end, right? And yet they still paddle out as hard as they possibly can to ride it for as long as they possibly can, knowing that it's going to go down and then there's going to be another opportunity. And so I think, you know, that's a little bit about, like, trying to get into your life and get out of your life what you want. You can't ride the waves if you're sitting on the shore. So getting out into the water and doing your best, even though you know the wave's going to end, is worth it. Third wave, from a, like, clinical psychology background, describes the third wave therapies, which is when, like, cognitive behavioral therapy and those types of therapies came into existence. And so from the clinical side, it has a pretty special meaning. And then just from a personal side, Brian, my late husband, was obsessed is probably a good word with Hawaii and, like, the surf kind of culture. And so the beach and the ocean and all of that were, you know, things that he was really drawn to. So from a personal side, Third Wave just made sense. Third Wave, we always talked about how Third Wave was Brian and I's baby before we ever had actual children. Because, you know, when you're building a business, you tend to spend a lot of time on it. And I mean, we would do date nights would always end at Home Goods, trying to find furniture and different, you know, art pieces for the office. We would build IKEA furniture, you know, when we were first starting out and a little scrappy startup. I have personally sat in all of the therapy chairs, kind of like a little Goldilocks situation, to make sure that they were comfortable and good for an average height person. But yeah, my background is in physical therapy. I have a doctorate from the University of Miami. Was doing that full time until my children were born, and then I kind of moved to more being a stay-at-home mom. I still worked as a therapist, but primarily was a stay-at-home mom. When my youngest, my third born, was born, he was 9 weeks old when Brian had a seizure at work, and they found a baseball-sized brain tumor in his brain. And, you know, from then, quite frankly, on, I kind of stepped into this role because, you know, when you have something as large as a baseball that's not supposed to be in your brain, it impacts so many things, and, you know, needing to help him, but also knowing, you know, that glioblastoma is terminal. we knew that at some point we needed to figure out what the succession plan was going to be. And so, I decided to step into it because I really already loved the business. I loved the people that were here. I loved the purpose of what we were doing. I felt really connected to the mission. And then, I also felt really connected to Brian doing it. So the year that we had between his diagnosis and his death, besides, going to countless doctor's appointments and that sort of thing, a lot of it was spent with him teaching me everything that he possibly could about the business, in the event that I wanted to continue it. And that was, 4 years ago now. But I also realized that, after Brian had passed, that I probably had to hire 7 or 8 people just to replace one of him, because he did so many things and had so many skills and talents, in regards to building a business, that I did not have, or maybe the time and bandwidth that I did not have. I think specifically from being a caregiver to somebody with a terminal illness, like there's no cure. We don't know when it's going to take him, but it's going to. I think it was really surprising how many people, do like toxic positivity and, just completely miss the pain and the hurt and the disappointment and, all of the other emotions that you feel when your life is flipped upside down. We all know that we are going to die, but nobody wants to talk about it. And I think that I feel lucky, actually, that Brian was somebody that wanted to talk about it. I distinctly remember being at lunch one day with him and us chatting, and it was a really odd experience for us to both, be sitting here talking about the business and talking about like logistical things, and have the phrase "when you're gone" be so common, and like just we could both say that without any emotion, quite frankly. And I'm pretty sure it was him that pointed it out, because it was just like, look around at all the other people that are sitting around us that are eating their lunch. And we look like we're probably having a lovely conversation, right? And if anybody had actually heard our conversation, they would have been heartbroken about what we were discussing. And somehow we were able to keep it together when we talked about business, and again, probably just a survival aspect. But then as soon as one of us would mention our kids, then, I met Pete through a friend, a really good friend of mine, that I also met after Brian had passed. And I think, for grief at least, like we say that it's a language, and some people speak it and some people don't, right? And then when you meet somebody else that speaks that language, it's just really exciting. And so when I met my friend, Maria, I immediately knew that she spoke the language, and we just clicked. And then she ended up introducing me to Pete. And then I think, obviously now when I look back on that, I feel like I felt that he spoke the language too, but it was before he had shared about his cystic fibrosis. And so I think there was definitely a connection of like, I don't know, just speaking the language. And then obviously when I found out about it, you know, I had just reached out to him of kind of the same thing of saying, like, I know that this is a lot, and I know that there's, maybe not a lot of safe places for you to talk about this, and I would love to be somebody that you could talk to about this, and whatever it is that you want to say about it, I'm happy to listen. I think just being, and then that conversation kind of led us into therapy. I don't know, because I don't think he even knew what I did. Like, we were just like social friends. I don't think he knew about Brian, but I don't think he had any understanding or knowledge of what Brian did until we just started having that conversation about wanting to be a safe place for him to talk to. So Pete had a friend that needed help, and I think he had just reached out to me because he knew about Third Wave and was like, I need to help this person. I absolutely need to help this person. How can I help this person? And that's kind of how we got started. And then I think that person just had a really good experience here, and that kind of snowballed into Pete wanting to send all of his folks that needed some help or needed, you know, somebody to talk to Third Wave. All of the research shows that the biggest predictor of success for therapy relies upon the therapeutic alliance, which is basically just the relationship that you have with your therapist. And so, you know, I think being able to, you know, we're a group practice with over 30 clinicians. So on one hand, it's a little bit of a numbers game, right? To be able to find somebody that you click with. But also I think, you know, we are a teaching facility, and so we really prioritize our development of our clinicians, obviously professionally, but also personally. And we make space for there to be conversations and vulnerability and accountability in how we work with our clients. And so I think it's just a constant like sharpening of our skills and how we relate to people, because we have this community that holds each other accountable. For a lot of people, I think cystic fibrosis in general, a lot of people, you know, a barrier to seeking therapy is not wanting to have to share everything about their diagnosis, right? You don't want to have to catch the person up to speed about what cystic fibrosis even means and what it actually is. And so I think being able to have a space that, you know, really does the background work to understand what this illness is and what that means, and or what it could mean, right, potentially for people. I think is just really important. I was educated about cystic fibrosis after becoming friends with Pete. I think I, like the majority of folks, think that I was under the impression that it was primarily a lung issue and not the, like mucosal linings of the body. So like the concept of fertility being an issue for folks with CF, I had no idea until Pete. Third Wave has over 30 clinicians with a variety of specialties. Everybody here specializes in process-based therapies, which is like CBT and ACT, which basically means, you don't have to look at the nuance of each of the components of whatever it is you're dealing with, because we all function on certain processes. We have 3 office locations, Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. And we are opening a 4th soon in Garner to reach more people. I wholeheartedly believe that we should treat our mental health like we treat our physical health. And, I don't think people need to wait until, this big thing in their life happens. I think being able to, life itself is hard. And I think learning, getting help and support, even in the normal, everyday difficulties of life is really important to make sure that you have the tools when something happens, right? Because nobody gets through this life scot-free. So coming and showing up and doing life with a therapist, I think, is really important, because it just gives you the tools so that when something happens, you have them and you're not, out in the ocean without a surfboard.